Hello, I'm Eulalia, also known as Happy Chinchilla across the internet. I live and work up in the mountains in a little rural town in Colombia, South America. I'm a graphic designer, illustrator, artist, teacher, and maker of stuff. Thank you for joining me for this taster session for this year's Kaleidoscope. Join me in creating a painting of one of the most beautiful and my favorite animals in the world, the African elephant. Grab all the blue and green paintings you have and let's have some fun painting patches of color. Because blue and green are really near to each other in the color wheel, this means that they are analogous colors and they will work beautifully with each other. Thank you so much, Tam, for inviting me to be part of this year's Kaleidoscope. I really hope you enjoy my lesson and I hope to see whatever you come up with. So let's get started. For this project, I'm going to be working on a 140-pound, 9 by 12 inches watercolor paper. You can work in whatever you want. I would suggest to you that you use something that is over 110 pounds. I provided a printable with the elephant we will be working, but I also have some references in case that you want to paint it yourself. What I'm doing here is creating a homemade carbon paper, and I'm doing this by painting the back with a graphite pencil. That way, when I turn it right side up and I trace the image, it will transfer to my paper. This is my watercolor paper. I place my image on top and I'm going to start tracing it, tracing my elephant. I'm not being super careful. I'm using the line as a guide. You can be as perfect or go as tight as you want with this drawing. There's really is no need to be perfectionist. Now, what I did before I started my process was to go and look for all the blues and greens that I have in my stash. And now I'm adding a tiny bit of all these colors in my palette. I might not use them all, but I do want to have the option to use them. If you don't have as many colors as I do, don't worry, use the ones you have. I'm going to be using a lot of brushes, and most of them are flat brushes. And this is because I want to paint inside the lines. Don't worry if you go a little bit over the lines, because we can always erase them at the end using some gesso. So what I'm going to be doing here is using the paint I have, all these colors that are analogous to each other. I'm going to start creating shapes. So basically patches of color, and this is where the name Patchwork elephant comes from, because of all these patches. So I'm not being very careful of where colors go. I just pick a color, pick a brush, and start painting. And that's one of the wonders of an analog color palette or color scheme, is that all the colors will work great together. So when I chose these colors, I'm going from blue to blue-green to green, and they work beautifully together. One option is, if you don't have as many colors, is to mix them yourself. So get a blue and get a green and start adding tiny bits of those colors to each other, and that way you can create new colors, new harmonious colors that will work in this color scheme. And as you can see, instead of washing my brushes, I'm changing brushes just because this is a faster way to create this. One thing that I'm trying to do here is to follow the natural curves of the drawing. So here in the mouth, there's like a little M. So I try to make it as closely as I can. Again, we can always fix anything that we don't like at the end. These are acrylics, and acrylics are pretty easy to change and to fix if you don't like something. I find that these colors are very, very rich, and I also, looking at my color palette, I can see that I have like a big difference. I have some light colors and some dark colors, and that is a good idea to have when you're using an analogous color palette, because it could become a little bit boring if there is not enough contrast. And naturally there won't be contrast between these colors because they're pretty close in the color wheel. So the way we create contrast is by using darker and lighter shades and tints and hues of the same color. So you can see in my color palette that I have a very light blue, this one that I'm using right now, and it will create some contrast when I use it next to a darker hue of the same blue or a similar blue. When you're creating your patches or these shapes of color, try to combine or try to have different colors in different places. For example, I'm using this light blue here next to an olive green and a yellowish green. The other side, the first time I use it next to a blue, like an ultramarine blue. So try to mix the combinations up, and that will give you a richer image. This is our first layer, so don't worry if the colors are not completely deep or they don't seem to be covering everything up right away. We have enough time to give it a second or third layer on top so they become more vibrant. I try to use the color I choose at least in 2 different places, but feel free to use as many places as you want. The other thing I'm doing is trying to make the shapes different. Try not to make them all the same size, even if it's the same, like you're painting a rectangle. Try the rectangle to be in different sizes. So some will be smaller, some will be bigger, some are in like a vertical position, others are thin lines. We're basically looking for variation. We don't want our painting to be boring or to have every element exactly the same. So try to play with that. Play with the different sizes you can achieve. I will continue adding shapes and colors until my elephant is completely covered, and I will try to use each of the colors that I have in my color palette. Again, if you don't have as many, you can always mix them. And remember, you can also use black and white to create tints and shades, and that will give some variety as well. My elephant is looking really, really pretty. I love how all the colors work with each other. And now I'm also adding like a second coat to make the colors deeper and so they look flatter. But there's no need. If you want to leave them with those different differentiations, small differences in the same color, it's totally alright. Now this is the last square, and I think you can see that I even have some shapes that are not like regular shapes, that they're more like a bit of puzzle pieces. So you can also make those. This is your painting, so feel free to make the shapes that you enjoy the most. Now I'm using the darkest of all colors that I have, the blue, that's like an indigo blue, to paint the eye. If you're using other colors, try to, if you don't have a really, really dark color, try maybe adding a tiny bit of either black or raw umber to create a really dark shade of one of your colors. These are like final touches where I see that some lines are not as straight as I want them to be. But remember, there's no need to be perfect. This is a handmade painting and it's made by a human, and as humans we don't make perfect lines. So don't worry about them being totally straight lines. Yes, a flat brush will help you get straighter lines and straighter edges, but that doesn't mean that everything is going to be perfect. Before I continue, I'm going to let the paint dry a bit. You can use a heating tool or just let it dry naturally. But before we continue, it is best that our painting is completely dry. Now, looking at my color palette, I will pick the lightest of all colors. In this case, I'm picking a sage green, and I will be painting the outside of the eye in this color. If you don't have a very light color, remember you can mix it. You can mix white with one of your blues or greens to create this super light color. For my next layer, I need everything to be completely dry. I'm going to start working with wax crayons. You can use oil pastels or Neocolor tools because we're not going to be using water on top of this. There's no problem if they are water soluble. I chose the blues and greens and white from my wax crayons, and I'm going to be using them all. This is going to be a very intuitive process. I won't be thinking which color is going to go next. I will just pick any color up and I know that it is going to work. I provided in the PDF a reference image that you can use if you're feeling a little bit lost as to what kinds of marks or patterns can you create. So take a look at the PDF and you can use it as inspiration or copy it. There's no problem either way. The other way you can use the PDF and this page, this reference page, is to use it as a coloring page. And you can, if you're feeling a little bit insecure about your color combinations, you can try them out first in the coloring page and then invest your time in creating an elephant with those colors. Or again, you can go totally intuitive and just start adding colors everywhere. And they're not going to clash. They're going to work perfectly with each other. Something I really like is to use light colors on top of dark colors and vice versa. I think there's a lot of contrast when you do this and you can make things interesting. Don't be afraid to repeat the mark you already made somewhere else. Just try to make it in or try to do it in a different color, and that will make the mark different even if it's the same. So have fun here, try things out. If you ever centangle, I think this would be a perfect place to try and make those kind of doodling here. It will be perfect. If you find that your wax crayon is not working really well on top of the acrylic, maybe you could try to add a layer of clear gesso on top, so that way the wax crayons will have like a place they can grab to. If you don't want to work with wax crayons, feel free to work with whatever you have and whatever you enjoy the most. That really is the most important thing, is that you enjoy what you're doing. So some supplies you can use instead of wax crayons. There are wax pastels, oil pastels, microns, acrylic paint markers, and colored pencils if you use some clear gesso. So think of what supply you could exchange or what supply you could use if you're not enjoying using the wax crayons. I'm nearly finished, and the next step, if you want, is to make the edges of our elephant a little bit more sharp, more crisp. So I'm going to use white gesso and I'm going to paint the edges, and that way the wax crayon will get erased and you can achieve a much cleaner edge this way. I really don't mind those little details, but I know that sometimes we want things to be really sharp, so I'm giving you this option. But you can always leave it with little marks showing. And I'm done. And I'm really happy the way my elephant turned out. There's a lot of variety in colors and shapes and marks and patterns. We ended up making a lot of patterns. And in this close-up, we can see that those patterns we make and those lines we make are not perfect. They're not straight lines, they're not done with a ruler, they're very much imperfect. And that is a great look. We can see the hand of the artist. We can see that a human was the one that made this. It's not made by a machine. And that's great. So I really hope you enjoyed the class, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. I would love to see anything you come up with, so please tag me in the Facebook group or Instagram or wherever you're sharing your work. I would love to see it. So that's it. Thank you. Have a great day and remember to have fun. Bye.